What's going on, guys? Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Amigoscode. In this crash course, you're going to learn how to properly test your applications. I used to have this thinking, writing code to test my code, but I have to be honest with you. If you want to become a real software engineer, then there is no way that you should be deploying code to your users without writing tests. So in this course, you're going to learn about unit testing, integration testing, mocking, and a bunch more. Without further ado, let's kick off this crash course. Before we kick off this crash course, this video is sponsored by Diffblue. Diffblue offers a powered AI unit testing coding generation tool for Java developers. Diffblue writes both your unit and integration tests with a click of a button, allowing you to focus on your business logic whilst increasing your code coverage, as well as speed up your development and making sure that you don't break anything. Diffblue Free Community Edition is available as the IntelliJ plugin, which is the IDE that I'm going to be using for this crash course. And for those watching this video, you can get a license upgrade, allowing you to write unit and integration tests for Java commercial or open source projects. Link will be in the description of this video. This all for now, let's begin. In this section, let's go ahead and focus on testing. So right here, I've got the UML diagram for the application so far. And what I want to do here is to break it down for you super simple so you understand exactly how to test your applications. So in here, remember, we have the student repository and this is an interface. And we have one method right here called select exists by email. And then it takes an email of type string and then returns true or false. And the plus sign in here means that this is a public method. Now remember, this interface right here is responsible to talk to our database right here. And then we have the student service, and this service right here has a private field. So you can see that the minus sign. So this means a private field of type student repository. So this service uses this interface right here. And then it has three public methods: get all students, which takes a student and then returns a list of student. Then we have add student, which take a student and the return type is void. And finally, we have delete student, which takes the ID of type long and then returns nothing, right? So this is void right here. So both student service and student repository, these are the units, and I'll tell you why in a second. So these are the units that we want to test. And then in here we have the repository. So this repository, remember, it's responsible for taking all the requests from the client. So this is our API in here, and this is why I named this as integration, and you'll see why in a second as well. But basically what we need to do is, let's start from this side right here, where I'm going to show you how to test the repository. And then we're going to move into the student service. And then I'm going to show you how to properly test the repository as well. So the student repository. So testing is something that you should really master, and you should know how to test your applications properly. If you are serious about programming and writing good quality software, then testing should be one of the things that you have no second thoughts. It should be something that you have pleasure doing, and you'll see that testing is not that difficult. So previously I've worked in companies where they didn't do any testing, and to be honest, the code quality was really bad, and deploying the application to production or to any environment was really frightening, because having no tests gives you no assurance of the quality of your software. So if you introduce a new feature, then you don't know whether you have broken anything. So that's the power of testing. So I want to make sure that you fully understand how to test your applications. And next, let me go ahead and show you exactly what we need in order to start writing tests. In order to write tests in the Java world, you will most likely be using JUnit5. JUnit5 is the 5th major version of the testing framework for Java and the JVM. So they say that JUnit5 is the next generation of JUnit, and this is because from version 4 to version 5, there was a massive refactor and improvement. Now in here, I'm going to click on user guide, and you can find the link under the description of this video. So let me click on it. And right here, they give you an overview of JUnit. What is JUnit5? So it's equal to the platform, Jupyter, and Vintage. And right here, the platform serves as the foundation for launching testing frameworks on the JVM. Then we have the Jupyter, so combination of the new programming model and extension for writing tests. So these are like the annotations that you'll see in a second. And then we have the Vintage, which is basically a test engine for running JUnit3 and 4 based tests. So these are the older versions of JUnit. So right here, if I scroll down, you can see that we have this section, so writing tests, and have a look. So this is how you write test. So you have a class, and then you have your under test. So in this case, calculator, and then you have a method in here. So void, you give it a name, and then inside you'll be performing one or more assertions. So here you can see that assert equals, and then this is the expected value, and then the actual is when you invoke the under test class, in this case calculator.add, and then 1 + 1, and this should equal true, therefore this test will pass. So in here you have a bunch of annotations, and in here you have a bunch of annotations that you can use. So at test denotes that a method is a test method, and then you have parameterized tests, repeated tests, factory, template, display name, before each, after, before all, nested, tag, so on and so forth. And you can even disable a test as well, including timeouts. So right here, you can go and basically just read about all of this documentation. And one thing that I want to show you here before we move on is that you see that we say assert equals. So in here, this is how you perform the assertions. If I click on this tab right here, so this is where I have the assertions, and this is the class assertions for JUnit5, and basically you can see all of these methods. So assert all, where you can pass a string, and then you can basically say assert array equals, and if I scroll down, you can see that a bunch of methods. So assert not equals, and then assert same, assert throws for exceptions, timeout, so on and so forth. So, and also assert true for booleans. So in here, what I'm going to show you is there is a better assertion library that the one JUnit5 provides, and that is AsserJ. So AsserJ provides a rich set of assertions that improves your test code readability, and it's designed to be super easy to use within your favorite IDE. So here you can see that, for example, this is how you use it. So if I zoom in a little bit, so you can see that you import assert for J, and then you can say assert that, and then dot is equal to, and then you have methods such as assert that, and then starts with, ends with, and basically you can chain all of these, right? So the same with arrays or lists, you can say has size something, and then contains, does not contain, and also asserting, for example, exceptions. This is how you do it, so on and so forth. So I actually prefer AsserJ instead of the assertions provided by JUnit5, and this is what we're going to be using in this course. So now that you know about JUnit5 and assertions, next let me go ahead and show you how to get your first test up and running. If you want to follow along and basically try for yourself, go ahead and basically clone this repo and check out the branch number 12 right here. So after GitHub Actions, so you can basically clone this and then check out this branch right here, or you can just basically just download the zip, but it's best if you use Git. So I'm going to leave the link under the description of this video so you can just check this branch. Now let me go to IntelliJ, and in here, remember I said that we have the student controller, repository, service, and also we have a couple exception classes right here. So let me first show you that in order for us to get JUnit5, we don't have to do anything. So here, go ahead and open up the pom.xml. And if I collapse this for a second, and in here, you see that we have this dependency. So org.spring-framework.boot and then spring boot starter test. And then the scope is test, which means that we're just using this dependency for testing purposes. Now, if I click on this artifact right here, so I'm just going to press Command and then basically click on it, and you can see the keyboard shortcut Command B or Control B for Windows. Now in here, so basically we have a bunch of things, but if I quickly show you, so if I scroll down, you can see we have dependencies, and here we have some auto configuration, JSON path, XML bind, and have a look, AsserJ. So remember I told you about AsserJ. So this is already included for us, which is really nice. We also have Hamcrest. So this is another assertion library. And then we have JUnit in here. Have a look. JUnit Jupyter. And the version is 5.71. So this is the default that comes with the Spring DataTest. And we also have Mockito. So we're going to use Mockito later. So you see how we do mock classes, but this is pretty much everything that we need in order for us to start writing tests. So which means that we don't have to go off and install anything, which is really nice. Let me close this. And next, let's go ahead and write our very first test. In order for you to write tests for your application, in here, if I expand the project tab, and you see that the Maven folder structure is, so src, and then we have main. So this is where the main code lives, right? So all of this you've seen. And then if I put this back, you can see that, so we have main, and then we have test. So in here, test. So if I click on test, and right here, you can see that we have one default test. So if I click on it and have a look, so we have this class called demo application tests, and then we have one single test. So this test doesn't do anything. In here we have this annotation at Spring Boot test, and I'm going to show you this in a second. But for now, let's just delete this. And what we're going to do is let's just basically, you can see that we have this play button in here or here. So basically, this will run all tests found within this class, or you can run a single test. So let's just run all tests. And you see run demo application tests. And there we go. You can see that the process has finished. And here you can see that we have some test results. So this basically took 45 milliseconds. This was the class. And within that class, we had one test called context loads, and it passed. So this test is pointless. So let's actually go and collapse this, and let's change this to it, and then should, and then add, and then numbers. So here, let me just create a class within this demo class. So here I'm going to say class, and then I'm going to say calculator, and then inside I'm going to have, so I'm going to say int, and then I'm going to say add. This will take two integers, so int a, and then int, and then b, and is going to return a, and then plus b. So this is the example that you saw before. And here, if I basically end this with semicolon there, and then format things, and we have our calculator. Now let's create an instance of this class right here. So here we're going to say calculator, and I like to name these are under, and then test, because it's the class under test, equals to new, and then calculator. Now in here, what I like to do with my tests is to have comments to lay out the foundation. So here I'm going to say // and then given, and then I'm going to say int, and then number 1 equals to 10, for example, or 20, and then int number, and then 2 equals to, and then let's say 30, and here I'm going to say when, and then when we say under test dot add, pass the number 1 and number 2. So this will give us an integer. So if I extract this to a variable, and I'm going to name this as result, and then finally I'm going to have then, and then here I could perform the assertion. So here I'm going to say assert, and then that, and here I'm going to basically import. So here import static method, and then check this out. So we have a couple of imports. So you can see that we have org.assertj, core.api. We also have Hamcrest, and we also have this one, which is deprecated. So let's select the first one, and then I'm going to say, so here basically it takes the, you can see the actual, so assert that, and then result dot, and then is, and then equal to. If I press, or basically I don't have to press Command P, you can see that we have the expected value. So what I can do is say, right, so the expected value for me is actually 50, right? Because 20 plus 30 is 50, right? So here I can just end semicolon, and we can also take this to a variable, and we can say expected. So it's really up to you whether you want to name things. And now this is our very simple test. So let's just quickly run it. And check this out. So you can see that the test passed. So here we have, it should add numbers, and maybe we should say it should add 2 numbers, right? So let's just change it quickly. It should add, and then 2 numbers. Let's run it again. And there we go. So this test passed, right? And this time it took a little bit longer, so 99 milliseconds, because we had some extra steps in it. But basically this is a basic unit test using JUnit and AssertJ. So let me just recap once more. So this annotation right here at test, this is JUnit, right? So this tells that this method is a test method. And then we have basically in here, I'm actually using BDD's test style. So given, when, and then. So this makes it super easy for someone looking at the test and understand exactly what's going on. So given, So these are the inputs. And then when under test with the method that you are trying to test is invoked, in our case add, when we pass the inputs number 1 and number 2, we then say then and then the expected. So we expect 50, and then we perform the assertion. So assert that the result is equal to expected. Now if I was to change this to 51, for example, let's just run it again. There we go. You can see that this failed and it says expected was 51, but the actual was 50, right? So here expecting 50 to be equal to and then 51. So there we have it. Let me just collapse this and you can see that this went red, and let me put this back to 50, and there we go. So this is your very first JUnit test with one assertion. Next, let's go ahead and test this student repository interface right here, which is a little bit more interesting. Right, let's go ahead and test this method right here. Select by and then email. So let's go back to IntelliJ, and in here I'm going to open up the project tab, and then I'm going to navigate to Java, so main Java, and then inside of student we have the student repository, and this repository, you can see it's an interface and is this interface that we want to test. So again, this talks to this database right here. So in our example, so you saw that we have, so if I just zoom out a little bit and then just zoom in here, you saw that we have a Postgres database running, right? So for testing purposes, we're not going to use the Postgres instance that we have locally, and I'm going to show you a better way that we can do this. So let's just quickly go back to IntelliJ, and if I put this back just like that, it's kind of hard to zoom with the trackpad. There we go. So I think this is good for you. There we go. So in here, the way that we're going to create a test for this is, you saw that if I open a project, you saw that we can basically in here we can say, right, so we can write, or actually we can right click and then we can create a new package. We can say student, and then inside of student, then we can say student and then have a new interface, and this will be or actually a new class, and then this will be student and then repository and then test, just like that. Enter, and then we can go and basically write a test, right? So you saw that this was a bit manual. So let me actually delete this package inside of the test folder, and I'm going to show you a better way of doing this. So in here, inside of this interface, go ahead and press Shift Command and then T, or Shift Control and then T if you are on Windows. And right here you can see that we have choose new test for repository. So 0 found, and that means if you have a test, it will just navigate into the test class. But here what we want to do is create a new test. So create test, and then you can see that this is pre-populated. So testing library, JUnit, class name. So basically this is the same class that we had just a minute ago. And then for the subclass, we're just going to leave it as is. And then destination package, you can see that this follows the same package as the one you have in main, right? And then we can set up the, basically we can have the setup method and tear down, so on and so forth. And right here, you can see that generate test for methods and then member. So select and then exists email. So let's just tick this and okay. And there we go. So you can see that we have a test class. So this was some auto generating for us. And you can see that basically we have the exact same thing here. Expand, you can see that we have student repository and then test. So now we can write our test. So here, let me just say it, and then should, and then select, and then exists by email. And I think we should have a better name here. So it should select, it should check if, and then student, and then exists by email. And basically the name here doesn't really matter. You can go as long as you want, but as long as it makes sense, that's what matters. So in here now, what we're going to do is, so let me just remove this import because we're not using assertions from JUnit. And here, let's just say that we want to, basically we want to auto wire. So private, and then say student, and then repository. And here I'm going to say under test, and then end this with semicolon. And in here, I'm going to auto wire. So here I'm going to say at, and then auto wired, and you'll see this in a second. And now what we can do is basically set up the given, when, and then. So here, let's go ahead and say that given, and then when, and then. And I'm missing an N in there. So given a student, so let's say student, and then equals to new, and then student. And then inside I want to have, so basically let's just have name. So I'm going to say Jamila, and then email will be jamila@gmail.com, and then gender, and let me put this on a new line. There we go, just like that. And by the way, do not type name and then column and then email and then column. So this is IntelliJ giving me hints. So here, if I say do not show and then hints for current method, you can see that that goes away, right? So here, if I press semicolon there, so we have a student. And what I want to do is, so given, so here I want to say under test dot, and then save the student. And then I want to say when, and then under test dot, and then selects exists email. In here, let's just pass an email. So here I'm going to say, let's just extract this to a variable as well. So email, and then here I'm going to say email. And then this returns a Boolean, right? So exists, there we go. And this can be lowercase Boolean. And then, so in here, then I want to say assert, and then that. And if I press option and then enter, or you can click on this bulb right here and then import static method, and make sure it is the one from AsserJ core API. And then I'm going to say exists, and then dot is, and then true, just like that. And you can name this to expected, for example. So if you want, so expected, there we go. And this is our test. So you can see that it's really straightforward, right? So as you have the given, when, and then it's very easy for you to set up your tests. So given a student, right? So here we're doing all the prep work. So we have an email, the student, we save the student. So all of this is part of the given. And then when we invoke the under test, and this is the method that we are testing, then the assertion is, so we say assert that expected is true, right? Because we know that this method should return true because this email is already owned by Jamila. So before we actually run this test, there is something that we should configure, because we don't want this test to run against our database right here. So remember I said, so in here we have, so where is it? So in here, right? So we don't want the unit test to run against our Postgres instance, but instead we want this to run against an H2 database, which is an in-memory database. Next, let's go ahead and configure this in-memory database. Right, so as I said, we want to run our unit tests for this student repository against an in-memory database. We don't want to run the tests against our local database because the data produced by these unit tests, we don't want to keep them in our database. And luckily for us, we have this database called H2, and H2 is an open source SQL database, and you can use it as an in-memory database. So to set up this in our application to use it for testing, it's really straightforward. So if I open up IntelliJ and in here open up project and then go to pom.xml, and what we're going to do is the following. So in here, doesn't really matter where we add this, but let's just see right after the Spring Boot starter test, let's add a new dependency. So dependency, this will be H2, and then the group ID will be com dot and then h2.database. Now, if this is red for you, what I want you to do is just go to project and then open up pom.xml, right click, and then, oh, actually, before we do that, let's also set the scope for this as they have done in here. So the scope for this right here is test. Let's also do the same here. So scope and then test. Now open up the pom.xml, right click, and then go to Maven and then reload project. And that should sort this dependency out. So now that we have this dependency, what we need to do is to remember in here we have application.properties. So application.properties, and this in here connects to our local database, right? So our Postgres instance. So what we're going to do is the following. We're going to create a new folder under Java, so test and then Java, and we want the exact same thing right in here. So main Java resources, test Java, and we also want resources. So I'm going to right click, and then in here, if I say new and then directory, I can pick this Maven source directories. So pick that, and there you go. Now take this application.properties in here, Command C, and then put it inside, and then OK. Now this application.properties is used for testing. And what we can do now is basically in here, we can remove all of this. So let's remove that. Basically, we can actually keep all of these. But one thing that I want to change is, so in here, the data source URL, as well as the username and password. So the URL, instead of Postgres, this will be H2. And then here we want an in-memory database. So say mem, and then column db, and then semicolon, and then db, and then underscore, and then close underscore delay equals 2, and then -1. So this is some configuration that we can add for our in-memory database, and this should be close, just like that. Then for the username, we want this to be SA, and then password as well, SA. And also what I want to set is the driver and then class name, and this will be org dot and then h2 dot and then a driver, just like that. And this is pretty much everything that we want. And in here, instead of say update, let's say create drop. So basically we want to have a fresh database every time we run the tests. Now let's go back to our student repository test, and let's actually just try and run to see if things will work. But I can tell you that it's not going to work, and this is because we need a special annotation. So here, let's just try and run the test class, and there we go. So you can see that we have a null pointer exception. and it says that under test is null. So this is correct, and that is because we are missing an annotation that will basically wire up everything. So basically it will start the application, it will connect, it will get a data source from the configuration that we have, and then we're going to auto wire things. So there we go. Now that we have H2 configured, next, let's go ahead and get this test class running, and then also add a second test. Right, you saw that this test, when we tried to run it, it did fail, and that's because in here, this test, so we have a test for this interface, needs to connect to the H2 database. Now, anytime that you are unit testing your repositories, you need to use this annotation right here. So I'm going to say at and then DataJPATest. And this is the magic that will glue up everything, including auto wire the student repository, and you can see that the error went away, and also spin up the database for us. So let's actually, just for a second, let me just put a breakpoint in here, and I'm going to debug this. So we can debug, or I can just right click on the method and then debug. And now check this out. This is familiar, right? So you can see that if I go to log again, so I just want you to see that it actually connected to the database, and in here, this is actually paused. But if I inspect the under test right here, you can see that this is a JDK dynamic proxy, and we can use it. So let me just stop this for a second, and then here, let me collapse this. Now, remember before this failed, so let's run the test again. So I'm going to click on the class and then run student repository test. And you can see that we have the familiar logging. And check this out. So let's have a look at the logs. So you can see that we have some logging, create table if exists. So this is because of this logging right here, this one show SQL. And to be honest, if you want, you can get rid of those because it's just noise on the console, but for testing it's absolutely fine. And you can see that we have create table, and then we have some shenanigans about the insert, and then this is our select exists method. So this is when it was invoked, and this is when the test ended. So it drop if exists, and you can see that our test did pass. So which is really cool, right? So let's now focus on testing. So now that we have things up and running and working, you can see that this test did pass. Now let's have a second test. Let's just duplicate all of this in here, Command C, and then I'm going to paste that, and in here it should check if student, and this name should actually be if student email and then exists. So that was a mistake there, and here it should check if student email and then does not and then exists. You can basically improve on the name of these methods. And this method right here, what it should do is, so let's just remove this save, right? So we're going to remove that save because we don't want to save anyone into the database. And here the expected is given this email, and then when select exists email, this should be false. So is false because there is no one with that email. There we go. So you can see that how easy it was for us to write a second test. So let's just run this one test. And you can see that this test did pass. Now, one thing that I want to do here is I want to have, so I'm going to press Control and then Enter. And here I'm going to say setup. And then here I want to say tear down. And then after each test, I'm going to say under test dot and then delete all. So I want to delete everyone. So after each test, I want to delete everyone, which means that for each test, we'll have a clean state. Now let's run all the tests in this class. And you can find all of this code under the description of this video. And there we go. You can see that we have 2 tests and they did pass. So they are doing what it's supposed to do. So this is really cool. Now, one thing that I want to mention is that the only reason why we are testing this student repository is because we have this method and this is our own custom method. So we wrote this SQL query and it's important for us to test that our queries indeed work. But you see that, so if I go back in here, if I basically put my mouse anywhere, so here I can say under test dot, and then this has a bunch of other methods, right? So delete all, exists, find by ID, save, so on and so forth, right? All of these other methods, we don't have to test them because we didn't write any of that. And it's provided by Spring Data JPA and it's already been tested. That's why they provide it to us as an API that we can use. So for those methods, there is no need for us to test them because it's given to us for free. The only methods that we have to test are the ones that we add in our interface. In our case, we tested that when we call this method right here, we tested both scenarios where the email exists and when the email does not exist. So it should check if student email does not exist, and then it should check if student, oh actually, let's just say when. So naming things can be really difficult sometimes, but if or when, it's the same thing. So there you have it. Hopefully you now know how to test your JPA repositories. So it's really simple, and if you break down things with given, when, and then, it's a piece of cake testing your repositories. Next, let's go ahead and learn how to test the student service. And if you have any questions, please do let me know. Right, so we have tested this student repository. Now let's focus on student service. First, I want to show you how you might want to test this, which will be the wrong way of doing things. And then I'm going to show you how to use mocking. So in here, let's go ahead and open up IntelliJ and let's open the student service class. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to press Shift Command T. So I want to create test. And you can see that we have the dialog, create test, and there we go. So JUnit5, and then we have the class name, and we can have the setup. So here, setup before, tear down, and then get all students, add student, so on and so forth. Let's just click on these 3 members. And by the way, we're going to learn about setup and tear down in a second. So we're going to use them and just say, okay. So now in here, so we have the student service test right here, and we have 3 methods, right? So currently I can just even say add and then disable. So this is you learning a new annotation, and this will disable these tests, which means that they won't run. So add disabled and they won't run. Now in here, I can go ahead and let's test that we can get all students. So you might even think that the best way for you to test this, and by the way, let me just remove the Jupyter API assertions because we are using AsserJ. So in here, you might think, right, so in order for me to test get all students, we first need to have the under test. So here, let's say private, and then I'm going to say student, and then service, under, and then test. And here, let me just press Control and then Enter, and you can see the keyboard shortcut. And I'm going to generate the setup. So in here, we could actually have selected this method from the previous dialog, But in this setup, so this will run before each test, I'm going to say under test equals to new and then student service. Now inside we need to pass the student repository. Now the way that we're going to do this is the following. So in here I want to say private and then student and then repository, student repository, and then pass student repository in here, just like that. And now before each test we're going to get a fresh instance for student service. Now in here, let's just say that let's change this name here to can and then get all students. And what we're going to do is the following. So basically this test is super simple, and that's because if I press Shift Command T and go back to student service, you can see that the only thing that it does, it just calls student repository dot find all. Now when it comes to unit testing, if I go back in here for a second, remember this student repository has been tested. We tested in isolation and we know that it definitely works. And inside of student service we have a reference, or we have a field of type student repository. Now you might be thinking that perhaps we can go back to the test and then here, so this student repository, maybe we can just say add and then auto wire, right? And then we get the real instance for student repository, and then we can add new students, delete, so on and so forth. But in reality, we don't want to do this, right? We don't want to do this because this student repository, we know that for a fact, indeed its implementation is good enough, right? So every single method that we have in it does work. And this is when we mock this student repository. So we say, right, so here we want this to be a mock using Mockito. So this is org.mockito, just like that. And now what we need to do is the following. So here, in order to initialize this mock, we need to say that Mockito annotations dot and then open mocks, and then inside let's just say this. So basically if we have more than one mock, it will initialize all the mocks in this test class. And this, so this returns a closable. You can see here closable. And what we're going to do is the following. We're going to take this just like that. So I've just pressed Shift Command V to extract to a variable, and here I'm going to say this will be private and then paste that, and here I'm going to say that this will be equals to that, and then after each test, so after, or actually tear down method, so here after each we're going to say auto closable dot and then close. So this allows us to close, and this actually throws an exception, so it's fine. Let's just say that we change this method to throw this exception. So this will allow us to close the resource after the test. And now, so we have things set up. So let's just in here. So now we can go back to testing our method. And the way we're going to test this is we're going to pretty much just say when and then under test dot get all students. Then in here we're going to say verify and we need to import this from Mockito. So here import static method, and this should come from Mockito, so verify, and this will be our mock, so student repository, and then I can say dot and then find all. So we want to verify that this repository was invoked using the method find all. So you can see that this is a little bit strange, right? But what is happening is we basically don't want to test the real student repository when we are testing the student service, because student repository, we know that it works for fact, and then we can just mock its implementation inside of the student service test. And the benefit that we get with that is that our unit test is now fast. So we don't have to bring up the database, create the table, so on and so forth, insert a new student, drop the database, and all of that stuff that you've seen when we tested this repository. So we've done that work once. Therefore, anywhere that we use this repository, we just mock it as we've done it within this student service. So in here, this is what we're doing. So basically we have a mock. So let me just put like that. So we have a mock for the student repository, and then auto closable. And this is because of Mockito. And I'm going to show you a better way of doing this in a second. And then we have the after each, which we then close the resource. And this is our test. So if I run this test, you can see that it works, right? So here, if I say verify that the method delete all was invoked, so this should fail. There we go. So this fails, right? And it failed because you can see that wanted but invoked delete all, right? And you can see that, however, there was exactly one interaction with this mock, and it was find all. So if I go back to the student service, so Shift Command T in here. So when the end test was invoked, so get all students, the mock was invoked with find all. And again, we just have to verify that this is called, because we know that whatever this returns indeed does work. And also we didn't write this method find all, and this is a good way of us actually mocking things, right? Because this is given to us for free and we just rely on its implementation. So there you have it. This is pretty much how you test using Mockito. Now, one thing that I want to improve here is you see that this can be like a little bit confusing and some boilerplate code. So let's just remove this. Let's remove this as well. And let's remove this, and that line. And then in here, so for this class, we're going to say add and then extended with org.junit.jupyter API extension. And then here I'm going to say Mockito and then extensions dot and then class. So that will actually do what we had before. So you can see that this is much cleaner now. Now, if I basically run all the tests in this class, you can see that the test failed, and that's because we have to change this verify in here to find all. And let's run the tests again. And ta-da, you can see that it works. And these two tests are disabled. That's why they're like that. And you can see ignored 2 out of 3 tests. So there you have it. If you have any questions, drop me a message. Otherwise, let's move on and test the add student method. Right, so let's test the add student method. So here, let me just show you again. So if I go to student service, so add student. So this is what we want to test, right? So add student. Now here we're going to use mocking again, because remember, we tested that select exists email works, right? So we have tested this method. So in here, remember before, in the repository, so we have two tests. So one that checks when the email exists, and the other one that checks when the email does not exist. So when it comes to test this is what we're going to do. So here I'm going to remove this annotation at disabled, and then I'm going to say can, and then add, and then student. And here let's basically we need to grab one student, so let's just copy some code. So from here we have this student, there we go. And if I go back, so can add student, I'm going to paste that, and then here I'm going to indent, or actually inline that. So now I'm going to say given, so I like to have all my givens, so given, and then here I'm going to say when, and here we're going to say under test dot, and then add student. We're going to pass the student, and then here we want to say then, right? So what we want to do, so what we want to do is we want to basically check that, so student service, let's go back, we want to check that the repository, so student repository was invoked with the same student that we passed. So how do we test this using mocks? Well, it's very simple. So here what we need is an argument capture. So I'm going to say argument and then capture, and this will be student, just like that. I'm going to call it student argument capture equals to, and then argument capture, so oops, so argument capture for class, and then student. Put this on a new line, just like that. So now what we want to say is, so here we're going to say verify, and then we want to have our mock, so student repository dot, and then save, and then here I want to say student argument dot capture dot, and then capture. And this might seem a little bit confusing, but the reason why we're saying right, so we want to verify that the repository was called with save, but in here what we are doing, we are saying we want to capture the actual student that was passed inside of this save method. So in the student service, so here, so when we say repository.save, we want to capture this value right here. So here, let me just go back, and now the assertion that we have to do is the following. So now that we have the captured value here using argument capture, we can say argument capture or student argument capture dot, and then get, and then value. This will be a student. And now I want to extract this to a variable. So this will be the captured, and then student. And what we want to do is say assert that, and then I'm going to press option and then enter, or you can click on this bulb right here, and then here, or actually we just need these parentheses so that this works, and assert that, so import and then static method, and then assertions for class types. So let's just pick that one, and here I can say captured student dot, and you can see that before we used to use is equal comparing field by field, but now it's been deprecated and we can just say is equal to, and then student. So this student right here is the one that the under test receives, and then the captured student is what this service here receives. So the student repository.save, we capture this value, and then basically we're just comparing that this student, what we pass in, is the same one that the student repository.save has been given as well. Now if I go back to the test, and here Let's run the test. So here, just run this test. And there we go. So you can see that this test did pass, which is really, really awesome, right? So hopefully this wasn't too confusing, but this is something that you have to get your head around and make sure that you understand exactly what's going on. But in a nutshell, we have the given, and then when the end of test dot add student is given this student right here, we verify in here. So we verify that the repository, and we actually capture the value. So we verify that the repository was invoked with the save method, but at the same time we capture the value so that we can actually make sure that the value is the exact same one which was invoked by the end of test. If you have any questions, go ahead and let me know. Next, let's go ahead and have yet another test for the opposite. So when the email is taken. Before we write our second test, what I want to do with you here is go to the top of this class and right click on this play button right here, or actually just click on it, and then you see that we have run student service test with coverage. We can also achieve the same by right clicking, go to more, debug, and then run with coverage. So let me just run with coverage, and there we go. So you can see that we actually have this pop up right here, and this is the coverage. And what I want to do is the following. So you can basically click on it and you can see that in here. So let's just zoom in a little bit, or actually expand this a little bit. You can see that we have, so this is the coverage, right? So the class student service right here. So the class has 75% right here coverage. The line coverage is 53%. And then the rest you can see, we have some numbers here, but we didn't actually do much around this area. So let me just hide this and then go to student service. And what I want you to see now is, have a look. We have these lines, so green and red. So green means that this actually has been covered by our test, but red means that we are missing some tests. Yes, we are missing some tests. So we're not testing this scenario right here, right? And this is what this coverage is telling us. So IntelliJ is quite powerful and quite nice when it comes to testing and, you know, giving us information about what we need to test. So let's go back to the student service test in here. And what we're going to do is test that when the email is taken, our code will throw an exception. So in here, let's just basically grab all of this, and usually with testing, there's lots of copy and pasting. So paste that, and then we're going to change the name for, so will, and then throw when email is, and then taken. So here's what we're going to do. So this will be the following. So given the student, and then when, so when this is called, we want to make sure that we have an exception being thrown. So this will be combined. So when and then, and at this point we can actually get rid of all of this. So just like that, and that as well. So now with AsserJ, we have assert and then thrown and then by, and here should be assert and then that, and then thrown by. So import static, and this will come from assertions. And in here, so this works as follows. So this takes a lambda, just like that. And then here we can say dot, and then has, and then message. And we can say has message containing. And basically, so if I go back to the actual test, so this is the message. So email, and then this is taken. So let's just paste that. And then here I'm going to say that, and this will be student.email. So this is basically Jamila, right? So this email right here. And also we can say, so before that we can say dot is, and then instance of, and if I go back again to the basically student service, bad request exception. So let's just take that, paste that, dot, and then class. And there we go. So basically this is what we want to test, right? But now if I run this, I want to show you that. So let's just run this. This will not work, and you'll see why in a second. So there we go. So expecting code to raise a throwable. But what is happening is, so let me actually just run this in debug mode. So debug, and let me go and put a breakpoint just here, right? So let's debug again, and this will make sure you understand exactly what's happening. There we go, and have a look. So boolean, and then exists email. So this exists email is false, right? This is false, and we want it to be true. But currently we're not telling our mock that when this method is called with this email or any given email to return true. So by default, if you don't specify a return value, it will just default to false, which is our case. So let's just stop this and then go back to the test. And in here, what I want to do is say given, and here let me just import the static method, and this will come from Mockito. So bdd mockito.given, and here I'm going to say student repository dot, and then our method, so select exists. There we go. And then we can pass the email. So here I'm going to say student dot get email, and after this I'm going to say dot will return, and then the boolean value, which is true. So let's run this again in debug mode. And now check this out. We said true, and which means that this will fall inside of this if statement. So now we are controlling exactly what happens when this select exists email is invoked. So let me just close this, or actually stop this. And then here, let me go back to the test, and we can run the test. And there we go. You can see that the test did pass. Now here, I could also say, let's say that I do have, for example, basically I said email, right? So if I run the test again, this will fail. And there we go. So you can see that expecting throwable, message, email, Jamila taken, and then basically this was what we are expecting, right? Which is incorrect. So I just want to show you that this is actually working. So email and then space there, and we are good to go. So one thing here also is what you can do is if you don't want to pass, for example, the email here, you can say any and then string. So if I run this again, you can see that this works. And there you have it. Finally, one little improvement that we can do with this test is that right here, you see that we are asserting that thrown by, which means that if I go back to the service in here, this method is never called, right? Because we throw this exception right here. So let's go ahead and actually reflect that in our test. So here, after this line right here, I can say verify, and then I'm going to pass the mock, so student, and then repository, and then I'm going to press comma in there, and then the verification mode. So this will be never dot, and then save, and we can say any. So just like that, right? So we are saying that this repository right here, so our mock, it never saves any student. So again, if I go back to the service in here, you can see that this method right here, it's never executed. And this is what I'm actually saying in here. So if I run the test again, and you can see that this also works. Now, if I collapse this and then scroll up, so the final thing that I want to do is let's run this class right here. So here we're going to run this with coverage. There we go. And let me collapse these stats in here and then close all of this, go back to the actual service class. And now you can see that before this line was red, but now it's been covered by our test, which is really, really cool. So there you have it. And also you can see that we have covered this test right here. This test is fully tested, or actually this method is fully tested. And the only thing that we have to do is actually test delete student. And this, in fact, will be an exercise for you. Go ahead and implement the tests for this method right here called delete student. Now that we have the student repository and student service both fully tested, now we can go and learn about integration testing. So as I said before, unit testing is about the unit itself right here. So we test it in isolation. So you saw that we tested student repository in isolation, all of the methods. Then when we tested it within student service, right? So because here you can see that it's a private field for student service, we mock this interaction, which means that we also tested this student service in isolation. Now, integration testing is when we test our application as a whole. So you can see the boundaries here, right? So the purple boundaries. So basically, instead of testing the unit itself right here, we test the application as a whole. So what we do is we actually spin up the application, and then we make sure that the integration between all of the components within our application does work. So it means that we actually fire a request into the repository, making sure that the API layer is intact, and then letting the request flow through the system to make sure that it does indeed work. So we no longer need to mock student service nor student repository, because this is an integration test. So let's learn how to perform integration tests within our application. Right, so we've covered quite a lot, to be honest. Unit testing, mocking, and you saw how we tested each unit in isolation. And yeah, so it's not really difficult, to be honest, once you understand exactly how things are put together. We've just scratched the surface, I gotta be honest. And next, what we need to do is actually focus on integration testing. So this is where you spin up the application and then you test your API endpoints, right? So if you have GET requests, put, delete, and post, then you want to be sending real requests against those endpoints and making sure that the request goes through the system and then does what it's supposed to do without breaking anything. So also the sponsors of this video, Diffblue, they have this awesome integration where you can pretty much just right click and then you can generate a test for your controllers, which is really, really nice. Now, if you're serious about becoming a software engineer, then I do invite you to enroll to both the Spring Boot Full Stack and React, which this crash course is a mini series of it. And also I've got a course just on testing. So making sure that you understand the overall picture, right? So this is where you learn about testing, you learn about mocking, how to properly write integration tests, and also I'm going to show you when you have, for example, external services such as Stripe and Twilio and how to properly test those. If you're serious about becoming a software engineer, go ahead and enroll to these two awesome courses. They are the best-selling courses on my website and I'm waiting for you. This is all for now. If you enjoyed this video, give me a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel so I can keep on recording more videos like this. And also, if you're not part of the Amigoscode community, go ahead and join. Over 20,000 people already, and it's growing like never before. So if you need help or you want to share your knowledge, I would love you to have you there. This is all for now. I'll catch you in the next one. Assalamu alaikum.